Montana Territory. May 1883. The train whistle cut through the dry, open air like a blade as the iron beast hissed to a stop at the dusty station in Miles City. When the doors opened, passengers spilled onto the platform, all but one greeted by embraces, handshakes, or shouts of welcome. One young woman stood alone, suitcase in hand, scanning the crowd with hopeful eyes that dimmed a little more with each passing second. Odette Sutton was 21, her dress neat but modest, dark hair tucked under a travel-worn bonnet. Her gloved hands clutched the worn leather handle of her case like it was the only familiar thing left in the world. No letter had come in reply to hers. No one waited. Just the wind and distant horses. A little boy bumped into her leg as he ran to his mother, who scooped him up with a laugh. Odette smiled faintly before turning her gaze back to the emptiness beyond the tracks, her chest tightening. "You lost, miss." The voice was low, warm, and steady. She turned to see a man leaning against a rail post, one boot crossed over the other. He wore a dusted hat low on his brow, sun-kissed skin, and a tan shirt with rolled sleeves. His light brown eyes met hers with quiet concern. I believe I might be," she said, straightening. "I was meant to be met by my cousin. But he is not here." The man pushed off the post and stepped closer, offering his hand. "Name's Nolan Oakes. I work cattle west of here. Was just dropping off a shipment of hides. You look like you could use a place to sit and a glass of water." Odette hesitated. "I should wait." "He may still come. You have a name I can call you." "Odette Sutton," she said softly. Nolan nodded. "Well, Miss Odette Sutton, how about I wait with you, least until you're certain he ain't coming?" Her fingers tightened on the handle. "I would appreciate that." They sat on the edge of the platform together, the sun settling low behind the cottonwoods. Nolan's horse, a blue roan named Dusty, pawed the dirt nearby. Time passed. The other passengers left. The station master locked the door. Odette's cousin never came. "You got anywhere else to go?" Nolan asked gently. "No," she admitted, the word caught between her throat and her heart. "You got family?" "None left." He looked away for a moment, then back at her. "I got a spare room in my cabin. It ain't much, but it's clean." "You'd be safe." "I do not know you." "I reckon you do not," he said, standing. "But I won't leave you at a rail station overnight. You can ride with me, or I can pay for a room at Mrs. Tawley's boarding house and come check on you in the morning." "Your choice." She studied him, really studied him this time. He had the quiet steadiness of a man who did not lie. She looked down at her case, then up at the empty road. "I will ride with you," she said. Nolan helped her onto Dusty with care, then mounted behind her, keeping his hands at the reins. They rode west, the prairie stretching wide and gold, the sky turning red above them. His cabin stood near the base of a ridge, tucked beside a stream. It was small, just one room and a lean-to barn, but it was warm, and it smelled like pine soap and leather oil. He gave her the bed and took the floor without argument. Over the next days, Odette tried not to get too comfortable, but Nolan made it difficult. He rose early to tend his herd, came back dusted in hay and sweat, and left his boots outside the door. He never asked her why she had come, never pushed her to decide what to do next. But he always made sure her tea was hot and her chair pulled close to the fire. One evening, as she hemmed a torn sleeve of his shirt, he sat across from her, his hat in his hands. "You waiting on someone to write you?" he asked. "No one knows where I am," she said softly. He nodded. "You came out here alone." "That took guts." "I had nothing left where I was." Her voice trembled. "My father died last winter. My brother left for California and never sent word again. My cousin said I could come stay, but maybe he changed his mind." Nolan leaned forward. "You got a place here, Odette. Even if you do not stay forever." She looked up and something in her chest cracked open. "Why are you so kind to me?" He gave a small shrug. "You looked like you needed someone. I know what that feels like." The next day, she followed him out to the pasture, watching as he checked the fence line. She carried a basket of bread and apples. He showed her how to tie a proper knot and how to tell when a cow was close to birthing. Her laugh came easier now, and sometimes, when she thought he would not notice, she watched him with something close to wonder. That night, as they sat on the porch, the sky thick with stars, she turned to him. "You never told me if you have family." "I do not," he said. "Just the cattle, the cabin, and Dusty. You live alone out here." "I did," he said, glancing at her. "Now it is the two of us." She looked at him, really looked, and felt something steady and warm take root in her chest. "I never imagined I would come out here and find someone who cared." He reached over, slow and sure, and took her hand. "You were not meant to be alone at that station," he said. "You were meant to find me." She did not pull her hand away, and in that moment, with the stars above and the cool wind brushing their skin, something between them shifted and settled, quiet, sure, and real. June brought long light and the scent of warming sage. In the weeks since Odette had stepped off the train, the land had begun to make room for her, the same way Nolan had. She moved through the cabin now with quiet certainty, fetching water from the stream, feeding the chickens Nolan had half forgotten he'd owned. She mended clothes without being asked, and once, after a thunderstorm, she washed the windows just because she said she liked things clear. That morning, Nolan returned from the southern pasture with a gash along his forearm, the result of a frightened yearling bolting through a broken gate. Blood soaked the cuff of his sleeve. He dismounted with less grace than usual and leaned against the post while Odette stepped outside, her expression unreadable. "You should have come straight back," she said, eyes narrowing at the sight of the wound. "Did. Just had to chase the damn calf first." She guided him inside without another word, then rolled his sleeve up and fetched her sewing basket. Her hands were steady, her jaw tight. "You're lucky it didn't catch bone," she said, dabbing the cut with whiskey before threading her needle. "Should see the fence," he muttered. She didn't answer. Instead, she stitched with precision, her lips pressed into a line. Nolan watched her face, noting the way she blinked faster than usual. When she tied off the thread and sat back, her hands stayed folded in her lap, her knuckles pale. "You angry with me?" he asked. "No," she said, then added, "Yes, but more scared than anything." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Didn't mean to worry you." "I know that," she said, softer now. He didn't let go of her hand. "I've been thinking about building a second stall in the lean-to. Maybe start keeping a mule. Could use the help hauling feed." She glanced at him, puzzled. "You've worked alone this long." "Wasn't planning to anymore." Her eyes searched his, and something passed between them, unspoken but understood. She stood and began clearing the table, and he stepped out to split firewood, his arm bound tight in a clean strip of muslin. That evening, Nolan cooked salt pork and beans while Odette folded laundry on the porch rail. A hawk circled high above the ridge, and the air smelled of sun-warmed pine. When he called her in, she set the last shirt aside and stepped through the door, already reaching for the plates. "You ever think about staying?" he asked once they'd sat down. She didn't answer right away. "I don't mean the cabin," he added. "I mean this life." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You think it would suit me? I think you've already made it yours." She set her fork down. "I don't know what I expected when I came here. I think maybe I expected nothing. You got more than nothing now." She looked at him then. Not startled, not shy, just level and quiet and clear-eyed. "You're a good man, Nolan." He swallowed hard. "You make it easier to be." That night the wind picked up, rustling the cottonwoods behind the cabin. Odette lay in bed staring at the ceiling. listening to the sounds of the night, the creak of the rafters, the low breath of the fire, the faint crunch of Nolan's footsteps outside as he checked the barn one last time. She turned her face toward the wall and let her eyes close, not because she was tired but because she felt safe enough to finally rest. At first light, she rose and stepped out into the yard barefoot. Nolan was already at the corral, watching the sunrise with a tin cup in hand. She joined him without speaking. He poured the last of the coffee into a second cup and handed it to her. A long silence passed. "My cousin wrote," she said at last. "The letter came yesterday. I read it after supper." He turned to look at her. "And he says he's sorry. That he forgot the date I was arriving. That he's moved east. He offered to send for me." Nolan didn't speak. "I'm not going," she said. He nodded once, then looked down at her hand where it curled around the coffee cup. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He took the cup from her hand and set it down gently on the fence rail. Then he reached for her, slow and certain, and when she stepped into his arms it felt like they'd been heading toward this moment since the first time he'd said her name. No words passed between them. None were needed. The sun climbed higher, flooding the valley in gold, and the day began with both of them standing on the same stretch of earth, no longer half lost in the world but found by each other. By July, the land had turned fierce in its beauty, sun-baked hills stretching out like hammered brass, the blue sky hard and wide above. The days lengthened and the work grew heavier, but Odette moved through it with a quiet urgency, sleeves rolled high, braid tucked under a kerchief that had once belonged to Nolan's mother. She didn't ask for rest, and Nolan didn't offer it. They shared the rhythm now. One afternoon, she stood at the edge of the corral, watching Nolan coax a skittish gelding into the halter. He clicked his tongue low and steady, one hand at the lead, the other brushing the animal's neck in slow circles. Odette leaned her arms on the top rail. "That one doesn't trust easy. Neither did you." She gave him a sideways glance. "Still don't. Not entirely." "Fair," he said, stepping back as the gelding finally yielded. "But you let the door stay open." She didn't respond to that. Instead, she opened the gate and stepped inside, walking slow toward the horse. Nolan didn't stop her. She offered her hand, and after a tense moment, the gelding let her touch his muzzle. He watched her carefully. "You ever worked with horses before?" "No, but I watched my father handle ours." He said the trick was to let them believe it's their decision. That's the truth, about horses and people both. They walked the gelding along the fence line, Odette holding the lead while Nolan kept pace beside her. The sun pressed down on them, drawing a line of sweat beneath his collar. She didn't seem to notice the heat. "You said once that you worked this place alone," she said after a while. "How'd you come by it?" "My uncle left it to me. He died in the winter of '78. Snow came early that year. Buried half the barn and most of the herd. You stayed anyway." "I didn't have anywhere else to go." She nodded, not out of sympathy but understanding. "I think maybe I did the same." They walked in silence until the gelding stopped to graze. Nolan tied the lead to a post, then turned to her. "You ever think about putting your name on the deed beside mine?" The wind stirred the hem of her skirt, lifting dust into the air between them. "You asking me to marry you?" "I'm not good at speeches." "You haven't made one." "I'm not planning to live without you, Odette." She studied his face, her expression unreadable. "You're sure?" He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough to feel the heat off her skin. "There's been nothing in my life I've been more certain of." She didn't look away. "Then you'll need to speak to the circuit preacher when he rides through." "I already did. He comes next Thursday." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You were that sure of me." "I was that sure of us." She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Then I guess I'll need a dress." "You've got one." "No," she said. "I've got a traveling dress. I want one that belongs here." Nolan looked down at their joined hands, then back at her. "You already do." That night, she sat at the table with a length of pale muslin spread across her lap, needle in hand. Nolan carved a new latch for the barn door, shaping it from a block of cedar. The fire crackled between them, and the hush settled in like a third presence. Not empty, not uncertain, just full in the way quiet can be when two people know exactly where they stand. When he rose to bank the embers, she looked up from her stitching. "You think it'll last?" "I do." She nodded once. "So do I." He crossed the room, knelt beside her chair, and pressed his forehead to the back of her hand. She let her palm rest against his cheek. Outside, the night held still. And inside the cabin, the world narrowed to only what they held between them: hands, breath, promise. The wedding was held beneath a cottonwood that bent low over the stream, its roots gripping the earth like old hands. The preacher, a stoop-shouldered man with a voice full of gravel, arrived with saddle dust on his collar and a Bible wrapped in oilcloth. He didn't linger on ceremony. Nolan stood tall in a clean shirt Odette had pressed the night before, hair combed flat, boots polished with beeswax. Odette wore a pale blue dress she'd sewn in the evenings, the seams careful, the hem even. She carried no flowers, only the weight of the moment in her chest. "I reckon there's no one here to give you away, Miss Sutton," the preacher said, glancing between them. "She gives herself," Odette said. That settled it. They spoke their vows with steady voices, eyes locked. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Nolan didn't hesitate. He took her face in his hands and kissed her once, gently, like it was the first time he'd ever believed in forever. By dusk, the preacher was gone, riding east toward Fort Keogh. Nolan and Odette stayed beneath the tree, their boots half buried in clover, the light slanting through high branches in thin, golden bars. "You didn't ask if I wanted a ring," she said, brushing her fingers over his sleeve. "I didn't think you'd want one. You were right. Still, I might carve my name into that tree someday." "Don't wait too long," he said. "I want folks to know whose land this is." They walked back to the cabin slow, their shoulders brushing, the silence between them no longer cautious. Inside, the fire was already down to coals, and the air hummed with crickets and the distant yip of coyotes. Nolan unlatched the window and let the night breeze in. Odette stood behind him, her hand resting lightly on the small of his back. "You ever think about children?" she asked, her voice quiet but sure. "Sometimes," he said. "You?" "I wasn't sure I'd live long enough to wonder. You got time now," she nodded. "I'd like a girl, one with your steadiness." "She'd have your spine," he said. "And your fire." Neither moved for a while. When she stepped away, he turned toward her and reached slowly for the buttons at her collar. She let him, her hands resting at her sides, her breath steady. There was no rush in them, no urgency. Just the certainty of two souls walking into something they'd already chosen. Later, when the lamp had burned low and the moonlight stretched long across the floorboards, Odette lay with her head against his shoulder, the quilt drawn up to her chin. "This place isn't what I expected," she whispered. "No, it's better." He turned his face into her hair. "Because you're here?" she asked. "No," he said. "Because you stayed." That night they didn't dream. There was nothing missing, no road calling them elsewhere. Just the soft breath of cattle in the barn, the hush of wind through the grass, and two hearts settled like stones at the bottom of a clear stream. August arrived with a heaviness that settled in the bones, thick heat, dry winds, and the kind of silence that only came when the land braced for storms that never quite broke. The grass had browned at the edges, and the creek ran slower now, its banks cracked where the water had receded. Still, life moved steady on the homestead. Nolan had taken to rising before the sun, riding out to graze the herd farther north where the grass hadn't burned to straw. Odette stayed behind, tending the garden and keeping the soil turned deep, where the roots could still find moisture. The tomatoes had come in small but sweet, and she gathered them in a willow basket, wiping her brow with a rag Nolan had once used to oil his saddle. That afternoon, as she shelled beans at the table, a wagon pulled into the yard. It creaked under the weight of rough lumber and barrels, driven by a man she didn't recognize. He wore a hat too wide for his head and had a beard that looked like it hadn't made up its mind which direction to grow. He tipped his hat as he climbed down. "Afternoon, ma'am. Got a delivery here for a Nolan Oakes. Ordered through the dry goods store, special timber, nails, hinges, some panes of glass." Odette set the bowl aside. "You can stack it by the barn, I'll settle the tally." He blinked once. "Well, I didn't expect that." "Most women wouldn't." She met his gaze without blinking. "I'm not most women." He chuckled, not unkindly, and did as she asked. She paid him from the tin box Nolan kept hidden beneath the hearthstone. When Nolan returned just before dusk, dust in his hair and sweat running clean lines down his back, she met him in the yard. "You send for building supplies?" she asked, brushing her hands on her apron. He glanced at the wagon bed. "I did." "What for?" He looked down at her, eyes soft. "Thought maybe we'd need more room, for when things change." She folded her arms. "You expecting livestock to multiply overnight?" "I'm expecting us to." Her arms dropped. "You think it's time?" "I think we've been making room in our hearts for a while now." "Might as well make room on the floor, too." She stepped toward him, the space between them easy now. "You're sure we can manage?" He brushed a callous thumb against her cheek. "We've managed everything else." They began building the extra room that week, side by side. Odette measured twice before every cut. Nolan hammered slow and true, never rushing the grain. At night they soaked their aching hands in cool water and sat close on the porch, not speaking much, just watching the sky shift from blue to indigo. Once she rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I hope the child's got your patience." He kissed the top of her head. "And your fire." By September, the extra room stood solid, whitewashed and ready. Odette had sewn curtains from flour sacks and lined the shelf with smooth stones she'd gathered near the stream. Nolan carved a cradle from pine, shaping the edges until they were smooth enough for a newborn's skin. Neither of them spoke much about what lay ahead. They didn't need to. That first frost came early, silvering the fields before the leaves had time to turn. Odette woke before dawn, breath clouding in the chill, and pulled on her shawl. She stood at the window, watching the frost melt off the fence posts, and felt a quiet stirring inside, deep, steady, undeniable. She waited until Nolan stirred, then placed his hand over the soft curve beneath her ribs. He looked up at her, eyes wide. She nodded once. "It's time." He didn't speak, just rose, pulled on his boots, and stoked the fire until the cabin glowed warm as an oven. He boiled water, fetched clean rags, and set everything in its place while Odette moved through the pain with the same quiet fortitude she brought to everything else. The child came just after noon, a girl, with her mother's dark hair and her father's clear, steady gaze. Odette held her close while Nolan knelt beside the bed, wiping tears he didn't try to hide. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's ours," Odette said, voice hoarse but proud. They named her Clara after the cottonwoods that grew near the stream's strong roots, quiet grace. That winter, the snow came down thick and slow, and the world outside the cabin hushed to stillness. Inside, they built a life threefold, Nolan mending fence rails by lantern light, Odette rocking Clara while humming songs her father once sang on long wagon rides, the air warm with wood smoke, and the scent of bread rising slow near the hearth. Love, for them, had not come loud or sudden. It had been built plank by plank, word by word, stitch by stitch until it stood as solid as the cabin walls around them. On Clara's first birthday, Nolan carved her a wooden horse, and Odette baked a small cornbread cake sweetened with honey. They ate it together on the porch, the child nestled between them, her tiny fingers clutching crumbs. Odette looked out across the pasture, where cattle grazed under a sky streaked with gold. I used to think love had to come like thunder. Nolan shifted Clara in his arms. And now I know it's more like rain falling slow into dry ground. You don't hear it at first, but one day everything's blooming. He leaned over and kissed her temple. We bloomed, Odette. She reached for his hand and twined her fingers with his. And we'll keep blooming. As long as the land'll let us. Together, they watched the sun dip behind the ridge, the sky turning soft and pink above their home. The wind rustled the cottonwood leaves, whispering through the branches like a promise kept. And they stayed there, the three of them, safe and whole, wrapped in the quiet grace of a life built true.